Coming in at number 5, we have Oradour Church in France. Located in central France, a few miles from Limoges lies a now abandoned town called Oradour-sur-Glane. The town is now filled with empty houses, train lines that are out of order, and a sign of tragedy. With roadside walls pocked with bullet holes, fire marks, scorching stone houses, the church roof has gone through some massive explosion. This tragedy happened on June 10, 1944, when Adolf Dieckmann received information from members of the Vichy regime that SS officers had been captured and were being held by members of the French resistance at Oradour-sur-Vaires. Dieckmann led his team to Oradour-sur-Glane intent on revenge. Whether he went to Oradour-sur-Glane instead of Oradour-sur-Vaires on purpose, or whether he mixed up the two towns because of the similarity in their names, is something we will never know. The men of the village were quickly rounded up, then herded into a variety of surrounding barns and garages, as the women and children were confined to the local church. Then a gas explosion was placed in the church and lit aflame. There was only a handful to survive the tragic accident that happened at the church of this town. With all the lives lost in the church and surrounding town of that night, it is said to be haunted by many spirits. As some witnesses report, as they stand at the church's windows at night, they see the dark spirits of the people who lost their lives walking through the ruined village's deserted streets. Others state they often smell the aroma of burning wood and flesh as it lingers over this abandoned village. Until recently, the new residents would leave gifts along the border of the village of the martyred as a peace offering for the spirits that still haunt the church. In the end, we will never actually know the reason behind the attack upon the Oradour Church on June 10, 1944, though some think there was an evil entity or spirit upon the church that coerced the attack to happen. Coming in at number 4, we have St. Mary the Virgin, England. In an English village, you'll find the Church of St. Mary the Virgin, built around 1350 just outside the main settlement. The church in Clophill, Bedfordshire was abandoned for around 170 years after it fell into disuse in the 1840s. There are a few odd things about this ancient little church, the most significant being that it was supposedly built facing the wrong direction. Churches are traditionally oriented to face east, the direction from which the sun rises, which in the Christian religion is associated with the location of heaven and the return of the Messiah. Churches are positioned with the altar facing east, so people will pray in that holy direction. Some have claimed that because St. Mary the Virgin Church faces away from God, it thus opens its doors to hell. Indeed, the church has a long history of reported hauntings and supposed satanic rituals. The 14th century church was reportedly used for satanic rituals in the 1960s. As rumor has it, bones were dug up and arranged in satanic patterns. A paranormal investigator has speculated that some kind of black magic was performed at a church in Clophill, making it one of the most haunted places in Bedfordshire. The investigator explained that there's definitely something strange going on at the church, and this personal view is that it's down to black magic practices held there. He explains that he has also had many people confess the terrifying experience that they've had with the church. One filmmaker told the investigator that he saw a dark shape that was extremely tall coming towards him. The filmmaker and his colleague ran when he felt something grab his arm, even though he couldn't see anything. Once police arrived to the scene, instead of laughing the claim off, they conjectured that they've spent a lot of time guarding the abandoned site, as many people experienced the same thing. Over the years, many people have reported seeing strange things near the church, from mysterious hooded monks to tall dark figures. In at number 3, we have Egg Hill Church, Spring Hills, Pennsylvania. Considered one of the most haunted churches known to man, we have Egg Hill Church in Spring Hill, Pennsylvania. The church was built in 1860 and was out of use by the 1920s. The most well-known story about Egg Hill Church is of the great number of people that supposedly lost their lives. This occurred at the turn of the century in the 1800s, when the pastor at the time ended the life of his whole congregation by poison and kept them in the nearby woods. Other stories say that the pastor only ended the life of the people of the parish. He reportedly would end their lives one by one under the mysterious circumstances and got away with it, until the day that he would be discovered, where he would end his own life in the church. Some who have been to the church say they have seen drawings of pentagrams and goats appear on the walls and ceilings, written by some unknown entity. Others say that from outside the church you can hear strange noises coming from the inside when the church is locked up and supposedly empty. Some claim the sounds are similar to children's voices. Therefore, there is no doubt that this haunted church has the potential to be cursed by fight the devil. In at number 2 we have Aqua Episcopal Church in Virginia. This church is said to be one of the most haunted churches in Virginia. Legend says that the church and the church graveyard, which has graves dating back to 1738, are both home to paranormal activity that has taken place for over 200 years. Even the early years of the church being opened were marked with tragedy. In the mid-18th century, a woman was hiding from a group of men within the church's walls and lost her life. Even more upsetting was the fact that she was not discovered until years later, when the church reopened after the Revolutionary War. No one knows exactly the details of the loss, yet there have been several claims of paranormal activity since. Her hair just as blonde as the day she lost her life. At that time, the church had lost funding due to the Revolutionary War, and that might have been the reason why no one discovered her body until later. Moreover, it's been said that blood stains from the murder remained on the floorboards for nearly 100 years, till it was replaced altogether with concrete. Many ghost stories worked their way through the community after the skeleton was discovered. Many parishioners refused to set foot in the church after dark. In the 1900s, people decided to seek evidence of hauntings for themselves. Many returned with chilling tales of having encountered an unfriendly presence. Built before the Civil War, this church is reportedly visited by the ghost of a soldier killed during the conflict. The most haunted part of the building is the church tower. Others claim that the reason for the haunting involves a young woman who was murdered there. The eerie lights and unexplained sounds are reason enough to stay away after dark. Even today, there is plenty of paranormal activity associated with the church grounds. Many visitors have reported hearing footsteps running through the graveyard accompanied by the sound of a violent struggle. Others claim to see the figure of a young golden-haired woman peering from the balcony window. With all the tragedies and loss of lives that happen within the walls of this church, not to mention the paranormal activity, it's safe to assume that there is some evil spirits and energy cursing the church. And finally, in at number 1 we have St. Columcille, Ontario. Dating back to 1855, St. Columcille Church was founded and located in the hamlet of Uptergrove. The original frame church was torn down and the present brick edifice was constructed in 1905. This structure sits on a hill far back from the road and can easily be viewed when driving on Highway 12 east from Aurelia. The ghost stories have been spreading since over 100 years ago, classifying the church was haunted, and these tales have been circulated ever since. Today, the church is deemed haunted by some local residents and visitors. There have been many reports of ghost sightings, shadowy figures that will suddenly appear, creaking doors, and eerie music that will play randomly from the organ. There have also been numerous reports of shadowy sightings of a figure wearing a black hat that floats through the choir area, creating chills for those who had observed it. Mysterious candlelight has been seen flickering from the windows on stormy nights. Many believe the spirit responsible is that of a former priest who, according to legend, pledged to complete a specific number of sermons, though he lost his life before he was able to attain that number. Now some churchgoers say he is returning to fulfill that promise.
Number 5 on this list is the Borobudur Temple. Borobudur Temple is located in Indonesia and is frankly extremely beautiful. It's located on the island of Java and is one of the biggest Buddhist temples in the entire world. It truly looks like something from a legend or from something directly out of an Indiana Jones movie. Now, it was built many hundreds of years ago between 780 AD and 840 AD during the Selandria dynasty. There's a lot of lore that surrounds this temple and a ton of mystery. Located in a very remote location, it kind of got forgotten about for several hundred years. Then in 1970, it was almost rediscovered by UNESCO, and it was decided that they would try and rejuvenate it to its former glory. Now, during the process of rediscovering this beauty, they also rediscovered the darker side of this place, which has people believing at least at one point the devil may have been hiding here. Gruesome visuals etched into the interior of this temple depicting some just horrible things. Torture, beheadings, displays of sheer violence that I can't get into detail on YouTube about. Some awful drawings showing what would have gone down here at one point in history. Also, along with these acts of violence, some drawings that seem to point to the presence of the devil. Drawings looking at potential rituals that would have been performed in honor of this devil. People worshipping the devil and praising him, all of that. Nowadays, it's pretty understood that this place no longer hides the devil. But for several hundred years, it's very possible this could have been a bit of a stronghold for either the devil or another evil spirit. Number 4 on this list is the Chornobyl Church. Now, I imagine a lot of you have heard about Chernobyl before, the devastating accident that went down in Ukraine back in 1986. If you aren't familiar, then basically a huge nuclear power plant exploded, which caused the worst nuclear accident the world has ever seen. It killed 31 people right off the bat, and then several more over the years from radioactive poisoning. That area where the blast occurred has been closed off to the public, and rightfully so. It's literally still radioactive to this day, and if people were to go into the 20-mile radius that's closed and then proceeded to stay there for an extended period of time, they would certainly feel the negative effects of doing so. All of this has left for a very creepy abandoned city vibe that looks like something straight out of the apocalypse. Most of the buildings here are horribly worn down and starting to fall apart. After all, it's been over 30 years and no one has looked after them at all. Which is why it's very strange to see the church in this village still in perfect condition. Recently, somebody entered into the radiation zone and went into this church. They were shocked to see that the church itself on the inside was still in perfect form. Even though everything around it has been hit hard with decay, this building still remains how it was. Why? Well, the person taking these photos didn't know, and they didn't stay too long to find out. Apparently, after entering, it wasn't long before they started to feel a very ominous presence. Something deep and dark and sinister lurking here, not wanting to be found. As if entering the church woke whatever this thing was from its slumber, and it wasn't ready to be woken. This individual got out of there as fast as possible and didn't want to investigate further, but it got me thinking that this church might be hiding the devil. A horrible accident occurs where tons of people perish. The whole city gets abandoned and no one can come into this area for over 30 years. And this one flimsy little church is still totally intact and looking pristine. It seems a little bit too suspicious for me. If this is the case and this church is hiding the devil, then we can take it a bit further too. Now the real question comes out about how the Chernobyl accident really went down. Maybe the devil, or whatever demonic creature is living in this church, had some role to play. Number 3 on this list is Greyfriars Kirk and Churchyard. This church is located in Edinburgh in Scotland. History Hit says, with the kirk tracing its origin to 1598 and the graveyard dating back even further to the 1560s, Greyfriars Kirk and Churchyard in Edinburgh is said to be one of the most haunted religious sites in the world. Known for body snatching and violent ghosts, the famously fearsome site has even been referred to by Scottish poet Robert Louis Stevenson. The site's most famous ghost is Mackenzie poltergeist George Mackenzie, who is known during his lifetime as a ruthless persecutor of Scottish Covenanters, a Presbyterian movement in the 17th century. His spirit was reportedly released in 1999 when a homeless man looking for somewhere to sleep broke into his final resting place, the Black Mausoleum. Next to this mausoleum is the former Covenanters prison, which housed some 1,200 members of a failed anti-government revolution in 1679. Only 257 prisoners came out alive, with the remaining dead sent to haunt the churchyard. This church is haunted by so much negative energy that people around the area believe it's actually attracted the devil. Basically, all of this evil has gotten the devil's attention, and it's possible that one of those evil spirits that's hiding out is the devil in disguise. It's also believed that the devil may have released all of these demonic spirits to keep people away from this place, as he's doing something sinister. We may never know for sure though. And finally, number 1 on this list is Egg Hill Church. Egg Hill Church is one of the creepiest and scariest churches on this list, and it's for good reason. The church is located in Pennsylvania and has seen a horrifying atrocity committed there in the past. Before I even get into the tragedy that went down here, let's just take a look at this place and how creepy it is. It's this small barn-looking structure that doesn't look to be in good repair at all. It's got a few gravestones sitting out front of it, and it's relatively in the middle of nowhere. It looks like the sort of place where a serial killer would be lurking, or in this case, maybe even the devil. In the early 1900s, this place hosted a horrifying mass murder. The pastor of this church held a congregation, gathering everyone in the surrounding areas to this church. When they were all inside, he chained the door shut and murdered everyone. He wasn't just interested in his visitors though, because right after he was done with that, he took his own life as well. This was obviously a major shock to the community when it happened, but even to this day, it's left people baffled. The pastor apparently never showed this sick and sadistic nature in his character before, and this act of terror came out of thin air. That's why people have speculated before that he may not have been acting by himself. It's very possible that it was him in the flesh but not in the mind, that his body was simply acting as a vessel for the devil or another spirit as they did this. To this day, locals avoid this place and claim that there is a dark force that haunts it. Maybe it's the devil just sitting, waiting in this church for his next helpless victim to wander inside. Number 5 on this list is Rosslyn Chapel. Rosslyn Chapel is located in Scotland and is arguably the most haunted church in that country. This chapel has a ton of ghostly legends surrounding it that lead to the lore of its hauntings. The Rosslyn Chapel actually writes themselves. In July 2006, a group of actors were rehearsing in the chapel for a play they were about to do at the Edinburgh Festival. One said that he saw a fairy-like figure in the grounds of the building. Another was locking up the chapel at the end of the rehearsal. As he was doing so, heard the voice of a child in the crypt. Obviously, he didn't want to lock the child in overnight, so he went down to the crypt to get the child, but found that there was no one there. Another tale says that the ghost of a white lady haunts Rosslyn Chapel. Legend has it that she is a girl from the St. Clair family who was bewitched by an evil spell and sleeps in an enchanted chamber. Here, she is waiting to be rescued by a knight. Once rescued, the spell upon her will be broken and the knight will be granted great treasures. And yet another tale is of a phantom dog which roams the grounds around the chapel, and on stormy nights its ghostly barking can be heard. We got a fairy, we got a child, we got spells, we got a dog. This chapel has everything that a paranormal lover could ever want. They also didn't mention in that article about the ghosts of the monks that supposedly live there. This used to be an area where a bunch of monks would meet while they were alive, and it seems as if their ghosts have never left. And the crazy part about all of this is that nobody knows why this church is as haunted as it is. Most places that are tied to spirits have some sort of horror story to go along with them, but there really isn't anything here at all. I suppose it's possible that this church just happened to be built on an area where tons of spiritual energy has gathered. Hit me in the comments down below what you guys think happened to this place to get it like this, cause I'm honestly stumped. Number 4 on this list is the Ness Church. This church is located in Norway and is no longer functioning. It's actually a collection of ruins now and a very popular spot for ghost hunters. The ghosts here are very interesting and unique. It seems as if they have a strong connection to electronic devices, because whenever anyone brings an electronic device to this place, it will immediately stop working and start flashing uncontrollably. If one wants to have an electronic device here, then it needs to be specifically made to withstand strong spiritual energy. The most popular myth surrounding the ghostly presence that resides here is of a priest named Jacob Christian Finnegan. This was a priest who presided over this church from 1800 to 1837. Apparently he suffered a very grim fate here along with his children. People believe that at some point a gang of thieves came to this place and murdered him. Along with his death, they took his children and bricked them up in the church, leaving them there before ransacking the place and taking any valuables. An even darker version of the legend says that the priest did this to his children himself and then promptly hung himself in the church for the locals to later find. I'm not too sure which legend is the true one, but either one would have left their dark mark behind. The screams of these children are frequently accompanied by the sighting of this priest. It's said that he'll stalk those who come here and follow them around, giving them a horribly uneasy feeling. At this point, the church is nothing but a ruin of its former self, and considering the ghostly presence that's waiting for you, I just avoid going altogether. Number 3 on this list is the Church of Agia Theodora of Vasta. This church is located in Greece and is one of the most unique churches you will ever see. Sticking out of this tiny Byzantine church's roof is 17 holly and maple trees. These are sizable trees as well and grow over 30 meters tall. There are 2 versions of how this church got its ghostly presence, and they're described well by Greeker than the Greeks. They write, "Coming from a family of only girls, Theodora, to save her father from having to join the army, disguised herself as a boy and joined up. Not long after joining the army, a local girl believed believing Theodora to be a boy, and when Theodora, for obvious reasons, rejected her, the girl, out of revenge, claimed she was pregnant by Theodora and demanded they be married. For reasons known only to Theodora, she did not reveal her secret, which could have saved her, and refused to marry and was consequently put to death. Version 2 is more or less the same, only this time, Theodora, again disguised as a boy, joined a monastery as a monk. Why she didn't save herself trouble and join a nun's monastery is not known, but anyway, a nun from a nearby monastery fell in love with the monk Theodora, the ending then being the same. Before her execution, Theodora prayed, "Let my body become a church, my blood a river, and my hair the trees." On the very spot where Theodora was executed, a spring gushed forth and grew to become a river which still exists today, as the river which flows beneath the tiny church. So guys, if that legend holds true, then not only is this church haunted by a ghost, but the actual church itself is a ghost. This whole thing was made up by the spirit of Theodora and therefore is basically a living church. Locals have said that because of this reason, the water that flows through this river has some exceptional healing properties and can cure many ailments. Considering this church may actually be the spirit of a person who has passed, I highly recommend saying a prayer before you enter. Number 2 on this list is the Templo Mayor ruins. So a church is typically defined as a place for Christian worship, but if we loosen up the definition a little bit and just make it a building or landmark where people would have worshipped higher beings, then the Templo Mayor ruins can certainly qualify. This temple is one of the most haunted places in Mexico, and for good reason. Gaurav Gupta writes, "This archaeological site in Mexico has a blood-soaked past. It is a haunted Aztec civilization site that has made its presence felt through the time. Around 4,000 people were brutally killed to please Aztec gods. The priests would cut out the beating hearts from the victim's chest and then throw their lifeless bodies on the stairs of the Aztec temple. Aztec's last emperor made his last stand against invading Spanish armies before he was tortured and killed. This Aztec is now a museum, and tourists report strange, sensational feelings and sightings of shadow figures." 4,000 people were likely sacrificed here. That is just an insane number of people to have died over the years. Not to mention the fact that a battle took place here, and that would have caused more loss of life in great numbers. Needless to say, the spirits of those that passed have never really left. Glowing orbs are always spotted at this place, especially in the evening. Some people have also felt contacted by the dead before. Like they go into a deep trance and get a vision of something to come or something happening in a totally other life. From my research, they've had a hard time explaining it, but they know that something paranormal has touched them. Some locals have even noted a bright light flashing up into the sky at this place before. It happens very infrequently and doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason to it, but every now and again you can spot a beam of light blast into the sky. I don't think it's unbelievable to think that this place is deeply haunted with all of the death that's happened here. From my reading, it seems to be decently safe to visit if you go during the daytime, but I'd still say a prayer to those that were lost here. And finally, number 1 is the Chapel of the Dead. This one is really interesting because it's actually a crypt underneath a big church. The Chapel of the Dead, or the Capuchin Crypt, is located in Italy, and it's underneath the Santa Maria della Concenzo dei Cappuccini Church. This church is located in Rome and was built in the 1600s. The church itself wouldn't be haunted if it wasn't for the 3,700 skeletal remains that are found underneath it. Yeah, that's right folks, this Chapel of the Dead has a bunch of dead in it. The remains of these dead are everywhere along the walls and represent different rooms of this underground chapel. There are 6 different rooms that comprise this chapel, and they are as follows: Crypt of the Resurrection, the Mass Chapel, Crypt of the Skulls, Crypt of the Pelvises, Crypt of the Leg Bones and Thigh Bones, and Crypt of the 3 Skeletons. Crypt of the Pelvises, guys, that's an actual thing. I feel like I don't need to go into detail about what sort of remains hang along the walls in that room, but yeah, that's an actual thing. And listen to what Wikipedia writes about the last room, the Crypt of the 3 Skeletons. The center skeleton is enclosed in an oval, the symbol of life coming to birth. In its right hand it holds a scythe, symbol of death, which cuts down everyone like grass in a field, while its left hand holds the scales, symbolizing the good and evil deeds weighed by God when he judges the human soul. A placard in 5 languages declares. Obviously, with all this being said, this place is deeply haunted. It sounds like something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie, and from what locals have said, it definitely could be. Severe bad luck can befall those that enter into this chapel, and it seems to be totally random. I could enter it and be like 100% fine, but you could enter it and just have horrible things happen to you for years. It's a really interesting place to read about, but definitely not the sort of place I'd recommend visiting.